I want to start tonight with a big topic, the future of the right of centre parties in Australia. I want to show you some real evidence from the weekend of why the right is in real strife. You have to start, of course, with the question, are the coalition parties in strife in Australia? And of course they are. They're out of power federally. They don't look like they're going to win their way back into office in Victoria next month. They could lose government in New South Wales next March, and that would leave the entire mainland in Labor hands, with only the Tasmanian Liberal government keeping the Conservative flame alive. Yeah, remember the name Jeremy Rockliff? He's the Liberal Premier in Tasmania, and next year he could be leading the nation's only coalition government, the most senior Liberal in office in Australia. Now, if you watch this program, you know the main problems at play here. You know why the Liberal and National parties have run into strife. They've lacked the courage of their own convictions. They went with a big government, big spending, anti-freedom response during the pandemic that just trashed conservative values about personal responsibility and self-reliance, that rode roughshod over our liberty, and didn't stop to question what the lack of fiscal restraint would do to inflation, to debt, and the tax burden for future generations. They've also failed to stand up for our social values, a proper telling of our history in schools, an explanation of why our civilisation has flourished, of how our prosperity is actually based on values and systems and institutions that work. And critically, the coalition rolled over on climate alarmism and net zero and drastic action that's hurting our economy, inflicting pain on Australian families, and importantly, won't make any difference to the climate. So we know that. We know that the problem with the Liberal Party in particular is that it's surrendered to the so-called moderate forces, the left-wing faction of the Liberal Party, the faction that runs from a fight, seeks only agreement and compromise with the left. It started with Malcolm Turnbull, of course, but now we hear the same jelly-backed rhetoric from Simon Birmingham federally and people like the New South Wales Treasurer, Matt Kean, too. For as long as these people dominate coalition policy and advocacy, right-of-centre politics is doomed to failure. Because even if it falls into government occasionally, it'll waste the opportunity. Just look at how the South Australian Liberal government under Stephen Marshall did so little and lasted just one term. Now, one of the big problems is that as a result of all this, the right, of course, has fractured. People have left and started or joined alternative conservative outfits. Think Cory Bernardi, think Ross Cameron, think Clive Palmer. Hell, go way back to Pauline Hanson. They all started with the coalition parties and left. And some voters went with them too. On the weekend, we saw how this is playing out. The Conservative Political Action Conference was held in Sydney. It borrows from American politics and it brings with it some of the polarisation we've seen in the US. They had an impressive list of speakers, Nigel Farage from the UK, Michael Shellenberger from the US, locals like Tony Abbott and Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, all well and good. And a small band of leftist tryhards put on a protest outside because they don't want anybody ever to be allowed to espouse any right-of-centre views. Now, I didn't go to this event. I caught up with some of the speakers at a dinner on Friday night and I had a good look at the program and I've spoken to some people who were there. And I think one of the problems here is a lack of debate at the conference. It seemed to be more of a rah-rah event for red meat conservatives, all trying to outdo each other by denouncing the current state of affairs. And I want to show you what happened when one Conservative warrior, former Senator and Howard Government Minister Nick Minchin, a man who fought and won some epic political battles in this country in the name of conservative values. Well, have a look at what happened when he dared to suggest that the solution for the centre-right, for Conservatives, was to get involved in the Liberal Party and win the debates over policy and personnel from within.
To be frank, I don't know that the Liberal Party needs a whole lot of changing. It has profound...
I thought...
calm down, will you?
I thought
Let
we
me
were a
finish.
Conservative gathering.
You're worse than a socialist audience. Give me a chance to speak.
I feel like I found myself on the set of Q&A.
Listen, I was a profound Conservative and fought every Conservative fight in the Liberal Party for 30 years. I was on the trenches. I know what it's like. So I'm not going to take any, rubbish from you lot. I'm sorry. The Liberal Party's values are values you should all support. Go and read the platform of the party. Read We Believe. We stand for small government. We stand for low taxation. We stand for federation. We stand for good government. Now, the candidates we select are a function of you. Now, I know you're all disappointed in the last 9 years of government. Well, I am too.
Let's give everybody their say, eh? Come on, please. Fair's fair.
I mean, wouldn't you want to hear what this bloke has to say? Minchin was a senior cabinet minister when Australia stopped the boats, paid down debt, delivered surpluses, legislated significant tax reform, fought terrorism and improved our relations with China, Indonesia and the US while winning 4 elections along the way. This rejection of the coalition parties by the populist right is a massive problem. First, just look at the raw numbers of what it does in electoral terms. In this year's federal election, the coalition got near enough to 36% of the primary vote, 3% more than Labor, which of course relied heavily on the Greens' preferences to win. But look at the first preferences that went to Conservative or right-of-centre populist parties like One Nation and United Australia, with more than 4% each. Add in some other numbers and minor parties, and about 10% of primary votes went to right-of-centre breakaway parties. That's the difference between winning government and losing. Now, let me just show you how this played out even in a seat that was lost to the Teals. In Wentworth, Liberal Dave Sharma won 40% of primary votes compared to 36% by the Teal Allegra Spender. Then there's Labor and the Greens, of course. But the minor parties of the right, One Nation, United Australia and Liberal Democrats, they took another 4.5% of the primary votes. Shift them to the Liberals and Sharma probably would have won. He only lost by 4% after preferences, so 4.5% extra first preferences does the job. So while Matt Keane and Simon Birmingham and most of the media want the coalition to chase votes to the left, that's political suicide, not to mention what it would do to the country. Clearly, the Liberal and National parties need to get back to their core values, their conservative values, especially on the economy and energy, but also on education and personal responsibility. The Conservative cheerleaders at CPAC want to get all emotive and firebrand about the Indigenous voice and the Republic, but neither of those issues is going to win or lose government for anyone. And if you alienate supporters of those causes, like me, you risk more damage. You have to modernise on some issues, that's undeniable. And people will have different views on what those issues are. But remember this, we never would have become a federation back in 1901 if Conservatives couldn't embrace change. Nick Minchin is right. If Conservatives want to see strong right-of-centre governments, they need to think about becoming members of the Liberal Party and the National Party. They need to shape coalition policies and choose better coalition representatives from within. The more of them that stand outside beating their chests about how woke the Liberals have become, the more they leave the Liberal Party's apparatus right around the country in the hands of people like Matt Keane and Simon Birmingham. And that won't do much for mainstream policies or a conservative agenda.